The Persian Muslim philosopher Ibn Sina, more widely known in the West as Avicenna, is one of the most influential and impressive polymaths and philosophers in history. Not only did he significantly influence the Islamic intellectual tradition, he also had a major impact on European thinking, inspiring the scholastic tradition and even writing a work on medicine that would be a standard textbook of medicine in Europe right up until the early modern period, around the 18th century. But another thing that Ibn Sina is mostly famous for is providing one of the most celebrated and perhaps impressive arguments or proofs for the existence of God in all of history. This is known as the proof of the truthful, and it is an argument that is based primarily on the concepts of contingency and necessity. To Ibn Sina, God is defined as the necessary existent, in Arabic al-wajib al-wujud. And what this means will become clear as we go down the logical journey of this argument. So when you look around in the world, everything that you see is essentially contingent. And what does this mean? To be contingent is to be dependent on or conditioned by something else. In Arabic, Ibn Sina uses the term mumkin al-wujud, literally meaning possible existent. A contingent or possible existent is something that could exist, but it might as well not exist. It is possible that it exists, and it is equally possible that it doesn't exist. And it is contingent, that is, it is conditioned or dependent on something else for its existence, which in this case would be its cause. Now, there are also impossible existents to Ibn Sina, such as a round square, for instance, which can't exist because you can't even imagine such a thing. This would be a complete category error, but we don't have to think about these impossible existents anymore. That's not relevant to the argument. Now, on the other hand, there could possibly be a necessary existent, something that has to exist, that by itself, by its own nature, has to exist without being dependent on anything else for its existence, not being caused by something else. In any case, it seems that at least most things in the world are contingent and caused. And when I say caused, that does not simply mean that, for example, I exist because my parents decided to have a baby, or that the table exists because someone decided to make it. This is also true, but with contingents and cause, Ibn Sina means something more profound. I only exist because the parts that make me up exist, and in this particular configuration. I only exist because the air that I breathe exists and gives me life, because of the just right amount of heat on Earth so that I don't freeze to death or burn to death. And every part of me that makes me what I am is also in turn contingent, being dependent on and caused by its own parts and conditions. None of these things that we think of, and it's a thing and then the thing that causes that thing and then that thing, none of these things necessarily exist in themselves. There's nothing about their nature or essence that tells us that they have to exist. Quote, "That to which possibility belongs in essence does not come into existence by its essence, for inasmuch as it is possible, existence by its essence is not more appropriate than non-existence. Thus, if its existence or non-existence becomes more appropriate than the other, that is because of the presence or absence of a certain thing, respectively. It follows that the existence of every possible thing is from another." So all contingent things are contingent, right? They're all dependent and conditioned by something else. They're all caused by something else. So that begs the question, are all things contingent? Or is it possible that there is a necessary existent? Something that necessarily exists by itself without depending on anything else? This is what Ibn Sina aims to investigate. Here, a Madhyamaka Buddhist might simply say yes to the first question. All things are indeed contingent and dependent. In fact, they would be saying that there aren't even things at all, but that's beside the point. Whatever contingent existent we take as our starting point, it is either dependent on or caused by a necessary existent or by another contingent existence. I don't know if you say this first thing, that what we consider contingent is caused by a necessary existent, then the argument is done. But of course, since most of us are probably scientific, rational people, we would say that no, this microphone is contingent, it is dependent on or caused by other things which are in themselves contingent and dependent on other things in turn, and so on. And again, I want to stress that when I say that something is caused by another thing here, I don't mean temporally, as we said, but cause, when we say cause here, it is those things that make something exist and be what it is at any given moment. And we quickly realize that we can do this ad infinitum, an infinite stretch of contingent existence. Oh, but you might say, at the end, there must be something that stops that chain of dependence, which in itself isn't dependent on anything else before it. Well, then you have basically concluded that there is a necessary existent and the argument is done. But Ibn Sina isn't this lazy. Let's instead presume that all existence that we can know are indeed contingent. But perhaps we can consider that the whole chain, or the whole set of all contingent things, all things in the universe taken together as a whole, that whole maybe is necessary. Right? Everything we can know in the universe seems to be contingent because everything is dependent on something, caused by something else. But that's unsatisfactory because then why are there things at all? If everything is dependent on something else, where is the sort of source of these things? What is the first cause, as Aristotle would call it? Because no matter how far we push the argument, we always end up with more contingents and never reach a cause that stands on its own, sort of independently, that started the chain. So again, let's then presume that perhaps the totality of all contingent things, this whole set taken together, is necessary, while all the individual constituents of that whole are the contingent things, but that the whole itself is somehow necessary. This argument does not hold to Ibn Sina. Why? Because what is a totality? It is a collection or amalgamation of parts. But if that whole is dependent on parts to make it what it is, it's no longer necessary. It too is contingent because it is dependent on its contingent parts and has been caused by them. Quote, if that other, so one of the existence in this chain of contingent existence, goes on to infinity, every one of the units of the chain will be possible in essence. But the whole chain depends on these units. Thus the chain too will not be necessary and becomes necessary through another. He further explicates on this point in the Isharat, quote, every totality having every one of its units as cause requires a cause external to its units. This is because either 1. It does not require a cause at all, hence it is necessary and not possible, but how could this be so when it is only necessitated by its units? 2. It requires a cause that is all its units, hence it is caused by itself. That totality and all its units are one thing. Further, kull in the sense of every one is not something through which the totality is necessitated. 3. It requires a cause that is some of its units. But if every one of its units is caused, then some of its units are not more deserving of being the cause than some others. The reason is that the cause of the caused is more deserving of being the cause. Or, number 4, it requires a cause external to all units. That is the remaining truth. He's giving us 4 options here. The first we've already covered to some degree. Maybe the whole set or chain taken as a whole doesn't need a cause. Well, we've already shown that it is caused because it is dependent on its constituent parts. As Ibn Sina said, it is, quote, necessitated by its units. The second option is that perhaps all of the individual units are the cause of the whole set. But this obviously doesn't make sense because all the units are contingent, so they can't cause themselves and therefore not the whole either. Thirdly, maybe one unit in the chain is the cause. But this is clearly not the case either because, again, each unit is contingent. Even if you would say that one of the units isn't contingent but necessary, then that unit wouldn't be part of the set anymore, because the set was a set of contingent things, so it would be outside the set, and again our problems would be solved. So this doesn't really solve the issue either. We're only left with the 4 option then to Ibn Sina. That is, that the whole set of contingent things, the whole universe with all its existence, must require a cause that is external to all its units. Quote, every totality organized of causes and effects consecutively, including a non-caused cause, has this uncaused cause as an extremity, for if the cause were an intermediate, it would be caused. So we have reached a kind of inevitable conclusion based on the logical experiment that Ibn Sina is taking us on. There must be a necessary existence that is external to the set of all contingent or possible existence. something that per definition has to exist and couldn't possibly not exist. It is the uncaused cause of all things beyond time and space. And this necessary existent, the al-wajib al-wujud, is God. Quote, "It has become clear that every chain organized of causes and effects, be it finite or infinite, is in need of a cause external to it if it does not include anything save effects. It is necessary that this external cause be linked to it as an extremity. It has also become clear that if this chain includes an uncaused thing, then this thing is an extremity and a limit. Therefore, every chain terminates in that whose existence is necessary in itself." But this also makes certain things to be required for this necessary existent. It has to be beyond time and space, as we said, otherwise it would be bound by those things and thus contingent. It can't be made up of any parts, it must be simple and unified, a partless reality. Because like we said, if it was made up of parts, it would be dependent on those parts, thus caused by those parts, and suddenly it wouldn't be a necessary existent anymore. Quote, "If the essence of that whose existence is necessary is composed of two or more things that unite, it becomes necessary by them. One of these things or every one of them will be prior to it and a constituent of it. Therefore, that whose existence is necessary is indivisible, whether in concept or in quantity. For the same reason, the necessary existent must be immaterial, incorporeal, so as to not be dependent on a body. It's also unlike anything in the world, not sharing in the quiddity or whatness of anything else in terms of genus or species. Remember that we said that the quiddity or essence of God is simply existence. Quote, "The first has no alike, no contrary, no genus, and no difference. Thus it has no definition and cannot be indicated except by pure intellectual knowledge." In this way, Ibn Sina also takes this argument further by also attempting to prove that this necessary existent, or God, aligns with the theological tenets of the Islamic religion. Most importantly for this, perhaps, is that the necessary existent is one, thus affirming the basic Islamic principle of Tawheed, or monotheism. After all, why does there have to be only one necessary existent? Couldn't there be 2 or 3 or even 10? Well, let's suppose that there are 2 necessary beings. Because they are 2, there must be something that separates them. So within the reality of these 2, there must be some things that make them similar and thus necessary, but also other aspects that make them distinct from each other, otherwise they would be identical and not 2 different things. But if that is the case, then that means that they are made up of parts or aspects in which they are different from each other, and then they wouldn't be necessary anymore, but would be caused by those parts, and therefore both of them are now dependent on some other actually necessary existent. So this is obviously absurd. There must, in other words, be only one necessary existent, or God, who shares all the characteristics, or perhaps non-characteristics, that we have just outlined. So in a nutshell, that is Ibn Sina's proof or argument for the existence of God, an argument that has become very influential throughout history. Now, if you want a more proper rundown of this argument, you should definitely check out Dr. Khalil Andani's channel called Thinking Islam, where he presents this argument. He has a video dedicated to this argument with visuals and graphs that really help explain it in an even better way. So he breaks it down in a more detailed and in just, I think, in a better way than I do in that video. So go check that out if you're interested. Thus, Ibn Sina believes that he has proven that there is a necessary existent, and that that necessary existent necessarily has certain features and qualities that align with the Islamic conception of God. And I will see you next time.